You're listening to the Lavender Witch Podcast. We're here to talk about all things related to queer spirituality with a focus on witchcraft and pagan practices. In this place, you are welcome, you are valued, and your story matters. I'm your host, Sam Wise. I'm an author, a columnist, a pagan priestess, and a real-life queer witch. Thanks for joining me today. Today I'm joined by Cassandra Snow, author of Queering the Tarot, and by Siri Vincent Plouff, author of Queering the Runes, for a discussion of why queer divination is so important. All right. Thank you guys so much for both being with me today. Could you start us off by just telling our listeners a little bit about yourselves?
Yeah, I can start. I'm Cassandra Snow. I am the author of Queering the Tarot, Queering Your Craft. Siri and I are co-authors of Lessons from the Empress, and then I'm the editor of Tarot in Other Words. Siri and I also have a magical podcast together called Chaos and Cunning, where chaos magic meets cunning work, and also we're at the crossroads of magic and daily living. So it's really one for the busy witches.
Yeah, relatable because we are both very busy witches. My name is Siri. I am one half of the Chaos and Cunning podcast, like Cassandra already mentioned. I also have my own solo podcast called The Heathen's Journey, which is coming back for season 3 this summer. If you're listening to this in order, I suppose. And I'm also the co-author of Lessons from the Empress, as Cassandra said, and a solo author of Queering the Runes, which is all about utilizing runes in a queer and liberatory way.
Thank you. And I have read several of each of your books and have just found them so insightful and so grounded in a way that is really appealing to me. I have a lot of Virgo in my chart, so I love actionable steps. So it's just so wonderful to have you both on the podcast because I have a very personal relationship to both of your work.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love if each of you could sort of describe your divination practice as it looks right now and what that brings to your life and to your community, just to kind of get us started.
Yeah, so mine is pretty scattershot, honestly. In terms of I am a full-time professional psychic. That's how I make my money, honestly. That's how I survive capitalism, and I love doing it. I will say that I am a sort of high horse I get up on, though, is I do know so many professionals who, through no fault of theirs, right? It's like constant time constraints from said capitalism, but like who are just not taking the time that they would benefit from the most with their cards or runes or whatever it is themselves. And so I try to make sure that I am leading by example where that is concerned. And so I pull some cards most mornings. I have ADHD and a 1-year-old and a bunch of different jobs. Like I'm also an arts administrator, like freelance part-time, but still. So I have so much going on. So I'm a much bigger fan of regular practice than daily practice. I think that language kind of sets people up for failure. Um, and so to me, that looks like my morning routine is roughly like involved pulling a couple of tarot cards or doing a bone casting, or in the winter, I like going outside with my hot coffee and doing some smoke or some steam scrying or something like that. So for me, it's in the mornings, most often when it is for myself. And then I have public offerings occasionally that are called Tarot Study Hall, which are really for anyone trying to like get in and their cards in a new way, whether that is a seasoned professional or a newbie or anyone between or beyond that binary. And so I try to, as I say that to say, I spend a decent amount of time like creating activities and stuff, but making sure I'm test running them a lot. Same with spreads in a way that also just like benefits me personally. I think I'm a very eclectic reader. There's because I do this, this is my primary income. And so a lot of readers, especially now, and this did not used to be the case, but a lot of readers now will say, like, I won't do this reading or I won't do this reading. Now, if I will answer pretty much any question as long as I'm not like, whoa, that's a huge red flag for me. Because we all have our limits. So there's not really anything someone could bring to me, and there's nothing I won't go to the cards about, that would make me feel like weird or away. I don't know. For me, with both clients and myself, the biggest thing is making sure you're taking to divination at a time where you are willing to actually get new information and when you are actually willing to take action. So I don't have a type of reading I won't answer, but if you do get a question that admittedly even I find annoying, like, is he going to come back or something like that? To me, it's not that I avoid those questions. It's just I only want to do them if you're going to actually hear me either way or secret third, fourth, or fifth way. And then if you're going to take appropriate action for yourself based on that. I don't like helplessness, I guess. And I think that's sort of one of my biggest slants with the tarot is I don't want um learned helplessness at my table. So other than that, I think there are plenty of reasons why you would want to know all kinds of stuff. So I'm pretty eclectic and I don't shy away from much.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like my divination practice right now is kind of I don't want to say lacking because that's kind of like me talking down about myself, and that's not what I mean. It's just more like I haven't been practicing divination as actively as other points in my life right now.
You also are a little concussed, to be fair.
Right, yeah, I'm not like Cassandra said, like being in a state to receive information. There's a certain level of wow, I guess I just have to hurry up and wait that I'm in right now. Um, because of being concussed. I'm fine for anybody listening and concerned about me. I'll be okay. I have two primary divination sources, and those are tarot and runes. Specifically, the Elder Futhark I found has been the one that I've been working with the longest. And because of that, I do kind of go through phases. I hate saying it that way, but like I kind of do. Like sometimes I'm in like ooh, tarot is amazing. I want to keep using tarot for myself, or like, wow, tarot is maybe too much right now. I just want, like a rune or something for the day. And that way, I also find that tarot and runes operate very differently. Somebody in my Discord server or a different heathen Discord server recently described it this way. Um, Tarot has very wide grammar and very specific language, whereas runes have a very small vocabulary, but they say a lot with that vocabulary. Um, so they're very different in terms of how I read them. They're very different in terms of how I work with them for those reasons. I think that, everybody has every different divination tool, even getting down into tarot decks, like between decks, I find that they have very different identities and, you know, flows and things that they like to do. And personalities is the word I'm really looking for. And runes have just a very different personality than tarot does. And different runic systems have different personalities as well, I'm finding. So, one thing that I'm doing right now on my Patreon, I am pulling a monthly Younger Futhark rune and doing a write up on that rune. And so, just for those of you who are not as familiar with runes, the Elder Futhark stems back to, we know at least 100 CE. But the younger Futhark, and the elder Futhark has 24 runes. The younger Futhark shrank to 16 runes, and it was in use primarily like right before the Viking Age and then up into the Viking Age, and was in use right before they switched to the Latin alphabet for writing. So that was, if you know anything about European history, that was a very tumultuous time. There was a lot going on. There was climate change. There was a lot of tyranny, a lot of violence, violence done by Vikings, violence done to Nordic peasants in a lot of ways. And yeah, it was a very tumultuous time. And I'm finding that it's a very supportive rune set for now because, the world is currently on fire.
What? This is how I'm finding out. Yeah, I love that Siri talked about sort of what the different styles of divination do for them. I realize I threw out a lot of stuff with no real like, whatever. To me, tarot is sort of my all-purpose. Like and it's also like that's what I've been doing the longest. That was my gateway into witchcraft, into really everything that I know and love, with the exception of the arts, which I was already in. And I think is why I took to tarot so much. To me, tarot is also a lot for creative exploration, and I would honestly say like spiritual or witchcraft exploration too. I think one of my favorite types of clients to get, and it's also the type I'm most likely to do for myself, is people who want advice or messages from beyond, or really anything about their journey as a witch, as a spellcaster, as whatever. Tarot is my absolute favorite for that. I do use a lot of Oracle decks. That is new to the past several years. I've always kind of liked them, but I was a little intimidated because they don't all have a specific system, the way that tarot does, the way that even the runes do, the way that like I've dabbled in playing cartomancy and Lenormand, and it's always like, okay, here's the system that you learn. And Oracle can be anything. However, something switched a few years ago, and all of a sudden, that's what I wanted. I was like, I like that I can just throw down some cards, and whatever's going to come up is what comes up. And so it takes me out of my head in a way that tarot does not, because tarot, I'm like, okay, so a four is this, and a wand is this, and this is this. And so it's like synthesizing it in my brain. And yeah, you have all that in the oracles, but it's more like, what does it mean to me in the world and not just in this deck of cards? So that's very liberating and freeing to me in a lot of ways. Similarly, I call it a bone casting kit, but it's sort of like a charm casting kit with some bones and shells and other oddities in it, just because I'm not a millionaire, and so charms are sort of cheap and easy to acquire throughout the world in a way that some of the other stuff is not. And that I primarily use for messages from God, spirits, etc. Except with clients, sometimes they just have a question and want that, and so that's what I'll do. But to me, that's still always like, okay, so I'm not, it doesn't, it, to me, that method feels less like I'm asking the charms and more like I'm asking my gods to talk to me through the charms. And so that is a very different framing. Whereas any sort of steam scrying, other kinds of, I have a honey calcite ball that I use for very specific purposes, because honey calcite has a lot to do with feeling like people want to support you and help you, and it's just tapping into that. And so that crystal ball is specifically like, how do I do that in this time? So I have a bunch of different methods, and they almost all have different spiritual components to me. For clients, it's kind of the same, right? They ask questions, I give them the answers, hopefully. But with it, what is happening when I do it for myself, like, or when someone from community is wanting to trade or can't pay or wants to know more about what I'm doing, that tends to be sort of the more nitty-gritty spiritual work to me. That is like why we do what we do, in my opinion, even though you can't do that 24/7.
I find that tarot in particular for me is very good for. I have a specific question about something that is very rooted in my everyday life. Like, tarot is willing to talk to me about surviving capitalism in a very, like, bitch, you need to save $500 kind of way versus runes, which are a little bit more like, well, we're going to tell you what we want to tell you, and it may or may not have to do with your savings account. Um, you know what I mean? Like they have just very different personalities that way. And I do think that tarot is particularly useful for those specific questions. And part of that too, I think, is because, one system was developed in like the very early Common Era. And therefore, systems of capitalism and the way that the world is now was not in place at that time. Whereas tarot, you know, developed early into what we would consider modern capitalism, but has a pretty deep understanding of that.
Especially Rider-Waite-Smith based decks, because that's not until the 1900s anyway, when a lot of this stuff was firmly underway. And I think that the way the
Yeah.
Rider-Waite-Smith it was put together, even though it quote unquote wasn't meant to be a commercial enterprise, I kind of feel like it was. I know that people might get mad at me for saying that, but I like it feels like it didn't take that long for them to decide to sell. You know what I mean? Like it feels like,
Well, I mean, it's in the name, right? Like Rider Waite Smith, like Rider is the publishing company. Like that's
yeah.
different.
And I love that you both mentioned sort of the way that different systems of divination show up in different ways for you, because that's been so true for me as well. I love, Siri, that you
Mm.
mentioned the different types of runes because I have always been an Elder Futhark girly, just because, frankly, when I was getting into rune divination, that's what there were resources for.
That's still primarily what there are resources for. I mean, the anything that isn't the Elder Futhark, you kind of have to dig. And I mean, there's some resources on the Anglo-Saxon Futhark, there are some resources on the younger Futhark, but yeah, it's hard to find good sources on the other systems.
Yeah, and my partner is a huge Futhork guy. He loves the Anglo-Saxon Futhork. So that's been really interesting because it's like two dialects of the same divination language.
I say runes are so cool to me because it also just gets me galaxy brained. Like maybe we're not doing enough with the alphabet. Like it gets me
Yes, though, like yes, there are cool shit we can
like in my
do.
head, I'm like, if we're doing all of this, yeah, if we're doing all of this with old alphabets, why aren't we doing this with ours? Like,
I know, or even something like emoji. I feel
yeah,
like the emoji spells that we all see on social media and have very big feelings about are not that off from some of the ways that the runes are used.
yeah. And like anything else, it depends on who's doing them. Like I've seen some that made me roll my eyes and be like, sure, Jan. But I've also seen some that I've been like, that actually seems like it will work though. Like,
I think that it's really interesting. You're, saying like, oh, maybe we should be doing more with the regular alphabet that we currently use. There is something that I will say about runes like being a different language that gets me out of my logic brain and into an intuitive brain.
mm.
But that is not to say that there's not a way that we could still do that with our current alphabet or something.
Well, and I'm thinking, yeah, and I'm thinking more like less. I guess I think about the one-on-one less is about runes because there's so much history there, right? And there's so much like these were quote unquote given to us by Odin, like, all of these things. I guess I think more how it would show up is like numerology, but for letters.
Oh yeah, and like sigils and well, we already use a lot of letters and sigils, but yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is a fun thing. If you translate your name into runes, you can get a little story, which I think is really fun. Mine is sunlight, ice, riding ice. Which is like
That's
I
so
won't go
cool.
into that whole thing, but like you can kind of like extrapolate like, oh, what's going on with this?
Well, and I think I think purely in terms of divination, I've seen Siri do such cool things with runes because with divination, we're also looking at psychic arts, right? We're moving it sort of out of the intellectual or even witchcraft and into like a very specific territory. And I've been in the room with Siri when like someone's asked specific questions and Siri has like literally pulled someone's name, like it's spelled out in the runes. And it gives like, we think about it as more broad, but I've also seen it be so much more specific than, say, a tarot card could be.
Right, yeah, and it's like I remember that particular reading because it was very like I often try to purposefully forget readings, but that one was really interesting to me, so I kind of kept it in my brain box. And that one was kind of like I can't remember what the name was that came up, but I was like, well, does Jason mean anything to you? It was like something like that, that was very clearly like modern.
Yeah. One of my favorite tarot content creators uses Scrabble tiles in their readings and just like pulls out a handful of them to see if any words show up. And I think that's so creative. I love watching people create new systems in real time.
I love that. Who is
Yeah.
that creator?
It's Charmed Intuition Tarot,
Okay, I'll
and
have to check them out.
their vibe is just so cozy. It's almost like
Yeah,
ASMR level. I put it on in the background sometimes.
that's awesome.
So I think we've talked a lot about why we love divination.
Yeah.
But why do you think it's important for us to queer our divination systems and to be intentional in that?
A lot of it for me is about what kind of community I'm speaking to or curating. So I feel like my answers are different for myself versus everyone else. So for me, as someone who is in a little bit in content creator space, but primarily to like sell books and get clients and things. But the books and clients part is like I do it because I am very intentional about the audience I am building. And I love how community driven most, not all obviously, but most queer people are. And in fact, Siri and I recently sent out a press release to all kinds of both witchy and queer outlets and about our podcast. And it is a magical podcast. It's off the beaten path. I did not actually expect anyone except witchcrafty things to pick it up. The only responses we have gotten back are from queer outlets. And so and so to me, it's also about like staying in the flow of that sort of like generosity, support, mutual aid, like all of those things. So to me, it's about continuing to give back to the community that has given me so much and continues to support my work so heavily. In terms of in general, I think for me, tarot specifically and later witchcraft were so formative to my own sort of realizations and coming out and but in that finding my own voice in tarot, in other words, I have an essay about like, hey, queers don't actually just fall off the planet once we are settled and out of the closet. We actually have whole full lives to live. And so in that whole full life, like how do we build with our queerness at the center, but without it being this big secret mysterious thing anymore? And so I think that is something that divination in general, any kind, is really, really good about. And again, it's a lot of what I'm saying is the same thing because a lot of what those lessons are is like, hey, you're saying you have energy now. How should you use it? Maybe now is the right time to give back to this community that has been supporting you. Maybe now is the time. And then it's also the other thing. It's like maybe you need a little help from a like-minded person. So there's that, but I also think in general, all of these things in the occult are tools to be yourself, like be the most yourself, like to max out the beautiful you-ness of you. And so I think queering them then becomes very important in a very straightforward way for queer people, because if we don't have a queer language and understanding, how are we going to find that essence of you that we're trying to bring out?
I really agree with what Cassandra said. I think that that is a good encapsulation for me of like why on an interpersonal and client basis, like I want to continue to queer the runes, queer tarot, like do all of these things. The one thing that I would kind of add on to that is that I know that whether or not we expected it, our work, separately, together, what have you, has become a resource for other professional readers, other witches, other people who are in this space, and, you know, working witches, you know, professionals. And if they are not queer, it's very important for them to have resources for, okay, like, how can I talk about this, you know, love reading with my polyamorous client who is queer and I'm cis and monogamous, you know? Like, I think that that is a really important aspect to the work. I knew that basically, when I started writing Queering the Runes, it was the book that I wanted when I started learning and did not exist in any shape yet. Um, so I think that there's also a huge aspect of that. I think that there, like, anytime you're talking about like um, marginalized identities, the words that are coming to my brain is taking up space, which is not a bad thing at all. But when you have people who are taking up space when they have, you know, been historically left out, I think that there's a lot of responsibility that is perhaps unfairly placed on those people. I'm not saying that, you know, like I need to be the explainer about queer shit to every heathen that I meet, right? Like far from it, I should not be. But that like I just think it's something that I feel, you know, in my own work. And I think that it is important to have those resources be available to the public, which is why I also do a combination of like free resources like the podcasts that are really in depth, but also paid resources like the books, like the Patreon, and all of that stuff, because I want this information to be available and digestible.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's something I really struggle with because there is a part of me that wants to make everything I ever do free to everybody because I want people to have the resource, especially when it comes to marginalized communities. And I find myself having to reel myself back in like, okay, I do need to support myself in a capitalist society. It's okay for me to be compensated for my work. And especially in queer communities, I think because we have that really well established culture of mutual aid, it sometimes there's almost like guilt that comes with, you know, I do deserve to be paid for my work. And finding that balance has been a challenge for me. I don't know about you guys.
I've always struggled with this. And then it also is the delicate balance that is purely capitalist, like even without all of the value stuff that you talked about, of like, what is the rate that like I will have clients and can also live? Because currently I am charging a little bit under what a lot of people consider an industry standard. But I live in a city where if I have, you know, 6 clients a week, which is almost never the case, but paying that rate, I'm going to be plenty comfortable and be able to offer like physical resources to other people. And so that becomes really important to me too, where after years have sort of come to is like, okay, I need to ride the balance of like, how high can I charge and still get clients in the door? Because right now, just no one has money, even people who previously maybe did. Because there's so much to say setting your value, but if no one can afford your value, then you're still not going to eat.
Yeah,
And that's a big thing. But for me, it is also I have many chronic illnesses, and so it becomes what do I need for this offering, whether it is an essay or whatever, to be possible. And if what I need is 20 minutes here and there, then I'm fine just like putting that up as content or whatever. And then there's more than one way to meet that, right? So, Siri and I need input for our podcast, as I'm sure you're familiar with. And so we need that input. And at the same time, it's not industry standard to like paywall your podcast. So, like, that's not an option. And so we do it in other ways. We have the Patreon, and then we're also always pushing on the podcast, like towards the end, like make sure you're hiring us for readings, make sure that you're buying our books, like all of these things. So I think, and our audience is really, it's small so far, but it's really beautiful. And so those things are happening like we see it. So I think for me, it's like what trade feels fair. And so,
Yeah.
and what trade do I need for it to happen?
Yeah, I know that for me, so I'm a witch with a day job and I'm also disabled. So I go in and out of being able to offer readings, which is not a great model for maintaining a client base. I will tell you that. Um, but like, if I'm working 40 hours a week and I'm also podcasting and I'm also doing all of this other stuff, I just literally don't have time. And that's already a lot for somebody who doesn't deal with fibromyalgia, right? So, that is something that I'm always kind of having to balance. We were talking, I think that Cassandra, you were in this conversation as well. So Diana Rose Harper, a fantastic, incredible astrologer, tarot reader, writer, human being, all of the things. We were talking about pricing because that's such a huge conversation just in the professional scape in general. If you take clients, is like, how are we pricing things? And Diana was like, okay, so there's the emotional part of it, which is hard. And if you can't get over that, like, do the math. Like, literally, what kind of money do you need to keep a roof over your head? And then what is your energy level? What is your time like? What is your availability to be able to provide spiritual services? And then it's just simple math from there, right? It's a division. It's like, okay, I want, this much of my income to come from Patreon. I want this much of my income to come from readings. And then how am I going to get there is like how you think about it. Um, so I also have a slightly different perspective on this stuff. Um, Not because I'm a capitalist, like I'm not about to jump scare you all with that. But because I actually have a master's degree and like half of it was economics essentially. Um, so things like supply and demand, like, like what Cassandra was describing earlier is literally the supply and demand graph.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're trying to find that sweet spot where your supply curve and your demand curve is meeting, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
if you're charging too much, not enough people are going to purchase. If you're charging too little, then you're going to have way too much work. And your quality is going to go
And it
down.
won't be fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not going to be fun. It's not going to be spacious. You're probably not going to be giving as good of readings. So you're trying to find that center. And taking that out of capitalism, like I kind of think about there's like another bar on the graph that is like energy, and another bar on the graph that's time. And it's all a really complicated equation, and I have no other advice for how to price your own offerings other than just, kind of like do your research in terms of similar people in your actual physical area too. Because if Cassandra and I were trying to make ends meet in like New York City or LA or something, like
There's no way.
there's first of all, there's no way. Second of all, like pricing just has to be so completely different. Um, and New York and LA clients know that too.
Well, and I will say too, one thing about where we are in capitalism is everything is expected to be very, very static and very like, if that's your price, that's your price. I am in the minority of people who have been doing, or I'm not, but because I have been doing this work, I'm a lot older than I come off. I'm 41. I have been doing this for money since I was 20, which is 2 decades. And I have learned that, I mean, I fell into the gap of like, no, a price is a hard boundary, and anyone trying to move you on that is being offensive. And I just have never felt like that when I was operating like that. It didn't feel good to me. It didn't feel good in my spirit. It didn't feel like my gods were particularly thrilled with that. And so now there is flexibility. Now I don't want people listening to this to like rush my thing and be, well, like, will you do my reading for $20? Like, no.
But within reason.
Yeah, within reason. And one thing I am always up about is everyone, when I sort of started taking my business from just like word of mouth to the internet to widen it so that this could be my career, so many people, this was in like blogger heyday, were also like, never barter, never barter. But like to me, that is so silly because if I want my hair cut by someone who wants their cards read and we're literally just going to trade that 150 back and forth, what is the point?
I will never not have barter and pay what you can available. I because it's so much more fun.
Yeah. I have also been so poor that barter was how I ate. And that was a big thing when I started taking it to the internet too, was everyone was like, it's offensive if someone is only willing to pay for dinner or whatever. And I'm like, okay, but some of us don't have a choice. Like,
Yeah.
when it's survival work, it's survival work. And there have been so many years where for me, that's what it was. And survival doesn't mean you get a fat paycheck at the end, it means you get what you need to survive.
That really ties back into that mutual aid culture that we were talking about.
Yeah,
Particularly with my queer network, I know that I've done home repairs for people in exchange for food. And
right.
that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also, Cassandra, you calling it survival work, like, let's not forget that for centuries, divination was survival work for people.
Particularly with the Romani people that a lot of readers love to appropriate the hell out of. Like, this was what they were doing to survive, among other things, but like, this was a part of it.
Yeah, yeah, if it's huge, right? And I think that it's one of those things that's like just because, tarot and divination for hire is not as, marginalized socially as it used to be, does not mean that it is out of that range of survival work for a lot of people. And if you are in, I also think that there's a bit of a glamorization right now where, like, if you are in a mode where you are truly doing survival work, you need to admit to yourself that that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, and I also think just because it, like any work, just because it starts as survival work doesn't mean that that's where it ends. There are definitely, like, I now today wouldn't do a reading in exchange for dinner, but for years, that's like what I had to do sometimes. And so, today my barter is more like, yeah, it's stupid that we're just gonna trade this back. Like, I'm gonna Venmo me and you, and then you're gonna Venmo it right back. That's goofy. Let's just cut the Venmo part. Um, like, that's so goofy. Um, so to me now it really is more about the practical, um, in terms of like why I will do that. And again, like any work, the goal is to move it away from survival and into more thriving. And knock on every wood, that's largely where mine has gotten. I do make a lot less than I think people think, but I also grew up shockingly poor. So I'm like, to me, this is luxury. um, to me, being able to buy what I want at the grocery store and provide for my friends when they come over, like, is luxurious. And so to me, I have gotten to that comfort place. And yeah, you're always trying to grow, right? But there's also other ways to do that once you actually have a little bit of money in your account. Like, that's when you start putting it in higher yield savings and things like that. So,
Yeah, and I feel like with tarot, people see it as one of those more creative, intuitive, woo woo, if we want to use that term, arts. I feel like people see that or are more reluctant to see that as work. And I think that can also be a challenge. And man, it would be so useful if I had two guests on my podcast who had written a book about balancing creative work with the demands of living in a society.
Hi, I wonder who those people are.
I will say that my other career is in the arts. And I will say I grew up so poor, and because of white privilege and because I was used to nothing, it didn't like occur to me that I needed to like do any specific thing to be okay. And so that's like an interesting way that like having no resources but also privilege like play like I could take chances, you know. And so I was able, because I wasn't used to much, and because of that privilege, I knew that I would be able to find some opportunity, you know. And so all of that to say, I took chances getting into the arts in college and beyond. And I think that we're talking a lot about the economics because I think it's rare that you get three professionals in a room to this degree. And so it's like gonna come up like, how do we, especially people who like have similar values, like whatever, I think it's just very exciting for us. So we're gonna go off about the like boring business part to other people. But I will say that I ultimately got into this because I felt like I came from an evangelical upbringing that I didn't realize was evangelical at the time. It wasn't, I read and the book For the Bible Told Me So, which was about evangelicalism and the ongoing issues of white supremacy everywhere in the US, but in the South or in the Bible Belt especially. And I was very shocked because I thought evangelical was like a specific thing that called itself that. But my denomination was like one of the core components of the book. And so reading it as a 30-something-year-old, I like felt betrayed. I was like, that's what I was being raised in. And like, I was like, and so then I had to do a second deconstruction after deconstructing from that faith in the first place of like, oh my God, well, what is all this other stuff, this harm I didn't realize I was doing? Anyway, all of that to say, I got into witchcraft and spirituality and divination because I felt like when things were good in any faith that I have been a part of, it felt so it felt so good, and it felt so liberating, and it felt so freeing. Even as terrible as that flavor of evangelicalism can be, the parts where it was just me and Christian God vibing were lit. Like they were, like it was. And so when I started deconstructing and moving away from that and coming into my own spiritually as well as creatively, queerly, all of these things, I was like, I want everyone to have access to this. And so queering also very much became about how do we find something that is truly liberating for us and others. And so that's when I started really digging into this. Um, and just so beautiful, all the places it has taken me. But I think, yeah, a lot of what we're talking about, like, yeah, it's survival work. Yeah, pricing is hard. And also, I don't want anyone listening to think that the takeaway is like, here's how to start a tarot business. The takeaway is very much like, we are three professionals trying to figure out how to maintain a spiritual and a professional balance. And like, that's where it's coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for anyone, don't feel like you can't pick up a tarot deck because you don't need survival work, because it shouldn't be about the work, especially when you start. I had no idea when I picked up a deck of tarot cards that this is where my life would take me. I thought, hey, this is a fun thing to do on a Saturday night that costs no money because someone handed me this deck. Like that was it. That was the thought process. And so um I think now my biggest sort of message is that these things are tools to help you find your voice, which is so necessary right now. And I think tarot and witchcraft are kind of just different ways to use the tool of spirituality overall. And I also like leaving it open-minded to just see where it's going to take you. And as Sam is trying to tie us back into the creative, for me, my whole life has been about feeling like I had enough creative outlets to survive. And then being able to add something like divination or witchcraft to that just made it all the juicier. So to me, those two sort of functions of my life have kind of always been hand in hand.
Yeah, I think one thing that I really learned through the process of writing Lessons from the Empress with Cassandra, speaking about creativity and tarot and all of that stuff, is that it's important for your creative practice, for your soul practice, etc., to get out of the space of your everyday life. Um, and for me, for years and years and years, and still to an extent, like when I was learning tarot, like that was it was a definitive thing. I was like, I'm doing tarot now. I am in a space that is separate from my own life. I am, entering this kind of liminal witchy space. Um, and it helped me help myself in a lot of ways. It helped me understand more what I was trying to do, more what I was learning, all of that stuff. Um, and I think that that's something that a lot of people need, particularly for self-reflection, particularly for journaling or something like that. If you just pull a card before journaling, it's like, okay, like if you create a little ritual around your tarot reading, and I'm not talking like a big, like, casting a circle or anything like that. I'm talking literally just like turn down the lights, light a candle, pull out your journal, pull a card. That's a ritual, right? And it separates you from the hustle and bustle of your mind. And that's really what I'm trying to get at. Um, and I think that, um, yeah, it's just so beautiful to do that. That's where I'll end.
And that's one of the things that I think tarot specifically does so well is I know that the left brain right brain thing has been debunked, but to borrow that language for a second, it really bridges that left brain logic and that right brain, quote unquote right brain creativity and intuition. I think I don't know what it is about tarot. Maybe it's because it's highly structured, but it also has these places where it's open to interpretation. But I feel
Hmm.
like, at least for me, it really does connect those two ways of being and those two ways of experiencing things. And it's almost like it becomes a bridge from one to the other. So I feel like that's one of the ways that, like you were mentioning, Cassandra, it's a very easy entry point into things that are a little bit more spiritual, a little bit more mystical, because it's still a little bit grounded.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, you put that really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I will say too, Lessons from the Empress, Siri and I wrote that book. So we taught a class first, and it was when the pandemic sort of was first happening. And so we did a class about essentially how to stay creative in really in our lifetime unprecedented times, certainly not unprecedented, but in our lifetime for sure. As long as there have been people, there have been pandemics. But um so but in our lifetime we had not experienced anything like that, at least not to that degree. So it was how do we stay creative and how do we stay creatively engaged? And I think what it came down to for both of us is creativity and spirituality, even for my friends who are diehard atheists or agnostics, are still just like core parts of who we are. It's just that those who maybe aren't spiritual per se express it very differently. Like most of them would still identify as humanists, which is still like recognizing the human spirit and how we can come together. So I think for me, it was like, okay, so in this trying time, what are the things everyone is turning to that can be good and useful and help them still feel like they are a part of the world? And it really, for us, was that blend of creativity and spirituality. But again, those things have always walked hand in hand for us. So it was just really beautiful. And then we turned that into a book where we also talked about like why this is so important for like basic self-care, not like even doing anything fancy, but like sometimes you need to light a candle and just sit with yourself or you're gonna fall apart. And so,
Mhm.
how do we do that even when things are like not like we've ever experienced? And then I love what it's become since then because it's just become this really generative journey for both of us of how do we not only stay creative, but keep inspiring other people to stay both creative and connected to whatever it is that they believe in?
I was actually just thinking about that. That's so funny that you say that way, Cassandra, because I was literally for my Patreon for the $10 and up supporters, I do creative co-working sessions monthly, which is basically just where we get on a Zoom. I actually pull a couple of oracle cards at the beginning of our sessions. But I was kind of thinking about that on because it was just a couple days ago as of this recording. I was thinking about it while people were working on their stuff during the creative co-working session. I was like, wow, like I really love that, like, since Lessons from the Empress, some of my work has just become holding space for this. Like carving out a time literally for, like, a lot of times the folks that join are people who don't have a ton of time in their daily lives, but they value creativity and they value the space to do it. And they're not necessarily doing anything professional with it. They're just like, I love doing shit. Like, I love doing creative stuff. And thank you for kind of like creating a container for it, right? So, yeah, I think it's also, then like, you see it with so much of Cassandra's work on their Patreon as well, on their Tarot in Other Words column, um, all of that stuff. Like, I think that it has really kind of blossomed into this is actually like a big aspect of both of our careers.
Well, and a lot of chaos and cunning too is like,
Yes.
yeah, we're focusing on these specific kinds of magic, but we have a divination corner at the beginning. And only we decided we wanted to kind of shirk forecasting, largely because there's so much of it. And I feel like we're not serving people when they are constantly being inundated with like, this is your week ahead. This is your week ahead. And it's like
Yeah.
so many different, like, that's so overwhelming to me. And I've seen the effect of that in other, like in clients. I've seen them being like, well, this TikToker I like said this, but this YouTuber said this. And I'm like, okay, well, let's back up. So we decided instead to be like, okay, how can we show people that divination can also be for creative inspiration or creative process or creative like editing, finishing, like getting it out in the world. So we focus our divination corner at Chaos and Cunning on like what a card or rune or whatever has to say for your creative life for the next couple weeks after you listen to that episode. And I think that that has been really generative for people as well. We also, at the end, we're always like, what was your chaos for the week? And what was your cunning for the week? And 3/5 of the time, that is like actual magic that we're talking about. And we're showing it, we're showing essentially it's like applied magic principles, right? Like how we're using it in real life, what we're doing. Applied learning. Bleh. But sometimes it is literally like, I took this chaos magic idea and then I just went to this concert to see what happened. And
Yeah.
so, or it's like, oh, well, I know that it's prime. I'm obsessed with my houseplants and my garden. And so, so much of my cunning work is through that lens. And so I'm always, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know, man. Sometimes I'm just chatting with my bleeding heart flowers and hoping for the best. Like,
Yeah.
and so showing people how to use spirituality creatively and to understand that so much of what we are doing in the day to day is already creative and is already spiritual.
Yeah.
And that's so, I feel like I'm saying that's so important a lot today, but I feel like this work is really important because I feel like that creative spirit is a part of ourselves that gets neglected a lot. And I hear people talk about the inner child, and I know that that's not quite the same thing, but I think when people talk about, oh, I'm healing my inner child, or oh, I'm reconnecting with my inner child, so much of that is learning how to nurture that creative self again, learning how to make art and let yourself be bad at it. I'm a very big advocate for making bad art.
Yes.
Yep.
Please, I love bad art.
Yes. And I love that you both are making space for that and helping other people make space for that because I feel like that's a very needed kind of healing.
Yeah, it's so funny you mention inner child work because I was also just thinking about that today. So I commented to a coworker yesterday. I was like, like when I was a kid, like adults seemed like more adult Was it just because they were all smoking cigarettes and traumatized and not going to therapy? Which I do think that was actually a huge part of it. But I also think it's because so many people, millennials, Gen Z, even Gen X too, like a lot of people are like trying to heal their inner child or like working on inner child work and like wanting to maintain that lightness or that like rediscovering some of those things that brought them joy and continue to bring them joy. Like for example, I felt very silly. So I was at a cafe that did a how to explain this? Okay. I was at a cafe earlier today that does a blind box swap. So if you get like something that you didn't want or like a duplicate or something, you can come like once a month and people are like swapping their blind box stuff. And I got a Labubu. It finally happened for me, Cassandra. It finally happened for me, and I didn't pay anything for it. It's amazing. Um,
I told you, I said don't buy one. I knew.
you did. You knew. She's beautiful. She's like mint green. And I also got a different one too. That I got a different blind box thing that's not a Labubu and that's not important. But it just brings me so much joy. And I was like trying to imagine like my mom like walking down the street with like a little stuffed animal like stuck to her like bag, and I was like, I cannot picture this, right?
Well, I was really, when I became a parent, I was like, I don't know if I'm mature enough for this, but I'm pushing 40 and I really want it. So, like, now is the time if I'm going to do it. And I will say, it does make you grow up in some ways, but there's also so much that I feel like, in so many ways, it also feels like without putting any emotional labor on her at all, that's ridiculous. I would never do that. It's so healing in other ways of inner child stuff
Yeah.
because you're like experiencing, not only are you experiencing this stuff again, but you're experiencing it like through a little one's eyes. And so it's like new. And so that has just been a really joyful part of the process. And then I also, in addition to inner child stuff, I was in college for theater. That's what my degree is in. And I went basically from a rough upbringing to an extremely rough first college experience. And I also think about younger versions of ourselves all the time, like, what does your inner 22-year-old need? Now that I'm 41, like, what does my inner 32-year-old need? What needs were not being met at that time? And so I think so much of this too, both creatively and in terms of spiritual connection, is also about helping you kind of rewrite your own story and open up new possibilities to new endings. Because, and even if you have a very charmed life, there's always going to be roads untraveled. There's always going to be tough decisions that were made. And so I think staying engaged creatively and staying engaged spiritually are like how we cope with that, how we heal from the fact that we are bothered by this untaken road, right? And it's like how we explore these things safely without sort of throwing everything that we've built away.
I want to talk about that for so long, but I'm gonna save that for the next time we get coffee, Cassandra.
So, one thing I didn't say when you asked about queering divination, because my brain wasn't working yet, was and Siri sort of brought this up and I thought of it then, but then the conversation went a different way. So, one thing that I think is so important to me with queering anything is the idea that cishet white patriarchy hurts everyone, including cishet white men. The lack of freedom, the way it boxes us all in, and like you have to be this and you have to be this. Queerness is one, I shouldn't say queerness, queering is one way, even if you're cishet yourself, to be like, okay, well, what if it didn't have to be like this? What if, there's so much compulsory lack of choice that we are making that we don't even realize. And I think that queering helps all of us, regardless of our identities, sort of escape those boxes and come into more authentic relationship with ourself and therefore other people and therefore spirituality and therefore creativity. And so to me, it's really important for that reason too. It's like we are all from birth put into these boxes, even by the best upbringings, just because we live, not to sound like the Joker, but we live in a society. And so that's what's going to happen. And I think exploring, one thing I always suggest too, because not everyone is like me, who's going to be like, oh, I like this, best way to learn, dive in head first. So not everyone is going to feel safe or good doing that. And in that case, you should not. That is not how you should operate. But for me, I know if I wait until I'm ready, I will never take a leap. But again, that is a specifically me thing. So I just leap and hope for the best. And sometimes it was the right thing to do, and sometimes there's a lot of cleanup after. So, but I think exploring the edges of those boxes and like what is on the other side of this. And that also builds empathy for other people. It also builds empathy for humanity as a whole and sort of makes us understand what we're sort of up against in a way that I don't think we realize without doing like queering explorations. And I think for me, it was also the gateway to like discovering be like anti-whiteness, all of these other boxes that were put in. For me, it was the gateway. Now, other people's gateways may move differently. They maybe discover racial justice first or disability justice, and that's fine. What I think is important to me is that we are all exploring and pushing against the constraints.
That reminds me of studying queer theory in
Mm-hmm.
college, which is a little bit of a different thing. But my favorite example of that to tell people is, Gomez and Morticia Addams are not queer, but they are a queering of a straight relationship.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect. Yeah.
I love that too. Yeah.
And it gives more freedom to people who are living, I guess, normative experiences when we say, it doesn't have to look this way. You can be a Gomez Adams and be totally whipped for your wife and worship the ground she steps on. And that's an equally valid way to exist as a straight man.
Yeah. And if anything, like in many times appears more like manly than a lot of other stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Because you're actually trying to do the things that you claim masculinity is doing for this woman that you're crazy about.
Right. I feel like we really covered our bases in a very good way. I think that, just final plugs for hiring Cassandra and I. I'm not currently open for readings. That's a real blink and you miss it kind of opportunity. So get on my newsletter, I guess. But also, uh, yeah, but also like hire Cassandra for readings. Get on our Patreons. Like we both individually have incredible Patreons, if I do say so myself. Um, but then if you have enjoyed this conversation, you can listen to us yap even more, like every other week during the season that we're releasing podcast episodes on our own podcast, which is Chaos and Cunning. Um, and yeah, it's a good time. We have about two interviews a season. Both of them are fantastic. And then every season for our patrons only, our paid patrons, we produce a mini arc, or ooh, we produce a side quest podcast. Um,
I like that.
yeah. And this time it was all about folklore, particularly like the folklore where we live and grew up and all of that stuff. So,
Upper Midwest folklore.
yeah, Upper Midwest and also some Appalachian and uh Carolinian folklore from Cassandra.
Yeah.
So definitely if you're interested in that, you can check that out. Um, I have the Heathen Sturdy podcast coming out. And if you loved Queering the Runes, you can take Queering the Runes, the course. It is as of June 20th, it will be open for ongoing registration. So at any point, you can sign up and get all that goodness.
Where can people find you on Patreon and on social media if they do want to check out more of your work?
So I'm at patreon.com/Siri Vincent Plouff. Cassandra is at patreon.com/Cassandra Snow. And our joint Patreon is patreon.com/chaos and cunning pod, or just chaos and cunning.
Just chaos and cunning.
Okay, patreon.com/chaos and cunning. Cassandra also has a Substack called Dear Tarot, which I think is like one of the cutest ideas ever, where they take advice questions and answer them with tarot. Um,
That part is growing. And also every week you get every week everyone gets, actually, speaking of sort of what the bulk of this interview was, there's a weekly one which is basically the witchcraft weather of the week. So if there's a Sabbath coming up or like what the moon is doing, stuff like that. And then I do a tarot reading and I break it down into like, this is what the cards are saying to focus on in the practical, so the busy day to day, in the creative, and in the spiritual. So that's weekly. And then monthly, I take reader questions and do like an old school Dear Abby column, but with um tarot cards.
yeah, so cool. I love it so much. And then we are also both on social media, me arguably less so. Um, Not arguably, I am definitively less on social media than Cassandra is right now. But you can find Cassandra at MX Cassandra Snow, Mix Cassandra Snow, and I'm at Siri.Vincent.Plouff. If you just like search for my name, you should find me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you both for being here. This has been such a fantastic conversation.